A little bit about my sharpening bench, sharpening station that's behind me. I built this 10 years ago, 8, 9 years ago. I've been using it hard ever since then and have been wanting to redesign it for a while, and I'm about ready to begin that build. I'll probably end up filming that build and posting as a project here on this channel, but I wanted to talk a little bit about why I'm redesigning and why I'm doing away with the current bench design. Because certainly sharpening is something people are always interested in, but more importantly, I think it's a good representation of the journey that we kind of go through. When you start woodworking, specifically hand tool woodworking, you kind of get heavy into sharpening and what you think you need and what kind of space you need and kind of how it matures and optimizes over time. And I've gotten to the point now where my sharpening process is incredibly minimal. And I just don't need all that space, and it's just kind of gotten in the way. So anyway, then I'm going to kind of open it up for questions. Certainly if you want to keep it in the sharpening theme, I'll be over at the sharpening bench. We can sharpen some stuff. I can answer questions about that, but there's no reason to just stick to sharpening. I got a bunch of walnut on my bench right now, so if we need to do any bench work, that's fine. I can move that out of the way if you enjoy watching heavy lifting. As usual in the chat room, hi everybody, welcome. If you can help me out, if you do have questions, put them in all caps. It just makes it a heck of a lot easier for me to identify who's asking questions and what I need to hit. So we'll be here for the next hour. So let me just switch cameras real quick. And this is the sharpening bench. The full details of this build actually are on my renaissancewoodworker.com blog. You're gonna have to go back a ways, or you could just go look under projects on the top tab. You'll see a projects tab and you'll see sharpening bench listed in there. And this was like before I even started doing video. It's been so long. The whole thing is done, frame and panel design, done out of just big box store pine. There are frame and panels on both sides. The panels are actually made out of old hardboard. And over the years, I've splashed and speckled paint. You can see there's all kinds of paint speckled there. I promise you this is not mold. The more I look at it, the more it looks like mold. It's actually paint that got splattered. And I think I tried to wipe it down or whatever. Over time, the entire case is kind of racked a little. So my drawers don't quite slide together like they used to anymore. And honestly, that doesn't really bother me because I don't even really use the drawers that much for anything. The key for me was having a big, wide surface. This is a 24 by, is it 36? I should know this. I think it's 24 by 36. No, 41 inches. Geez, that's big. It's just a piece of MDF that's got laminate glued to both faces. I didn't even, and then I used a poplar hardwood banding just to cover up the fuzziness of the MDF face. But I wanted something that was flat, but even then I realized I didn't need something that was gonna be dead flat. And if I needed a dead flat surface, I would bring in like a granite plate or whatever. But I went with a laminate top because I wanted to be kind of super easy to clean up. That was mistake number one. As you look at this, you can see it is an absolute mess. And more than anything, it's a mess filled with grinding wheel grit, filled with swarf, filled with all kinds of nasty stuff, to the point where I don't even like setting my edge tools down on this bench anymore because they're gonna get dull just in contact with all the grit and the nastiness on here. I've tried cleaning it a number of times, and I think all the grit has done is score this laminate surface and kind of get deeper in there. There's just no way around it. I can't really end up cleaning it anymore. The next thing is I designed this to have a bunch of different drawers and compartments for the various sharpening implements. And that is what I'm talking about when I talk about kind of the journey of sharpening. And I don't even actually remember exactly what drawer it was. If you look at the blog post, you'll see, but I was using, let's see, let's spend some time talking about that. I was using a Tormak Wet Grinder. That was kind of, at the time, it was kind of the end-all be-all. You could do anything with that. And as somebody coming into hand tools and knowing nothing about sharpening, I thought this is absolutely what I need. The irony is I quickly realized it wasn't what I needed, but it is a fantastic tool for turning tools. So I actually still have it, even though it very rarely gets used. And it breaks my heart because it's a very expensive machine, and I keep thinking I should just sell it because it's in great condition. But the minute I sell it, I know I'm like, you know what, I might want that. As much as all the sharpening I do is freehand these days, even a lot of the turning tool work I do is freehand, I still in the back of my mind think someday I might just want to have a reset button. I want to just reset the bevels perfectly, and the Tormak would be pretty good for that. So I had that Tormak. I also had a Work Sharp 3000 for some reason, and I thought that that was what I needed to do my planes and my chisels. Basically, if you haven't figured it out, I was succumbing to blogs. Actually, there weren't even really that many blogs back then, but I was succumbing to magazines, and everybody was saying this is what they needed, and I was picking up stuff left and right. And frankly, it was also a time in my career when I was a lot younger and I was making a lot more money, like more money than a stupid 25-year-old should be making. So I was spending it. I didn't have any other things to spend it on. So I ended up with several kinds of stones. I had some water stones, and then I went over to ceramic stones, but there was a lot of machines and things. So this design needed to accommodate a bunch of stuff. So I immediately started thinking, where can I put everything? This entire lower cabinet was really designed to put like the Tormak in there and the Work Sharp in there, the various machines. And I was actually planning on buying a regular bench grinder at the time. So I suddenly was saying, I need all kinds of space. These days, down here, it's just storage. I've got some sandpaper, I've got some turning tools, various hardware things for future projects, and my Tormak is still down there. But for the most part, it is mostly empty. It's a huge case. I even put laminate on the inside. And actually, can you guys see that? That's what the laminate should look like instead of this nasty thing up top here. But you know what? Hey, I made bridle joints in the frame and panel doors and hung Euro hinges, and you know, they still work very well. The drawers, this top drawer was meant to hold all of my Tormak jigs. Those actually live in their own case right now. So this held all my Tormak jigs. Now it's become a place to stick camera gear, GoPro gear, and various cables and things, which is nice. I need that. This drawer had all of my grits and wheels and things for the Work Sharp. It had, remember the Work Sharp has those glass wheels that you peel and stick sandpaper on. I had them all in there, and they were all perfectly laid out and everything. Now it's become a place for stickers and, you know, just random junk that's fallen in here. Some anti-rust removal stuff has fallen in here, wax, and even a mailing envelope for some reason. This drawer had books and manuals. It had like all the little sharpening, all the little manuals that come with your hand planes from Veritas, or the Leonard Lee book, the Thomas Lee Nielsen book. This is even before Ron Huck came out with the book, so I didn't have that yet. Actually, I still don't have that. They all lived in here. It was kind of like my reference drawer. That quickly became a mess, and as you can see, more camera gear, webcams, some duct tape. Everybody's got to have duct tape, and just random stuff shoved in here. This drawer is the only drawer that has remained true to sharpening. It has my Sharpen stones, a couple of diamond stones, some various, another flexible strop, extra blades, files, just other random things that live in this drawer. But it is still sharpening, at least. At least I can say that much. But the irony is that drawer stays closed most of the time. As you can see, the case racks on other drawers. There we go. Most of my sharpening stuff now lives right here on the bench because I'm constantly want it out and to be using it. I put this Home Depot special vise on the side, specifically thinking I could use that to hold card scrapers while I'm burnishing the edges. I eventually added a hand crate grinder and clamped it right back here to the edge. And then I added a saw vise and bolted it, screwed it down to the side. The whole thing sits on casters, locking casters, that slides and moves around. If you look in the back of the bench, there's a bunch of holes and things back here. At one point, I'd actually put stops in place. If you guys have seen those jigs floating around, I know Lee Nielsen did a video on it where you have the various stops that you set your blade against, and it sets the projection on a honing guide, because I was using honing guides at the time. I still have one somewhere. One of those Eclipse style guides. It's in the back there. I was using a Veritas MK2 at the time, and I was using those as like a quick way to set my, my blade projections. I eventually gave up on that, moved away from that, moved on to something else, removed all that stuff. So over the years, the sharpening station has just gotten dirtier and has become more and more disused. As you can see, it's just storage. And in my experience, in my shop, the more kind of space and storage that I have for stuff, the more I end up filling it with crap that I don't need. And I did my shop renovation and I got rid of a lot of stuff. I moved a lot of stuff out of the shop and kind of put it into its own Rubbermaid containers and things. And I can even do the same thing with sharpening. So how things have changed for me today is I use diamond stones pretty much exclusively. I don't use, my Sharpen stones actually live in Maine now. That's kind of become the second shop. Still love those Sharpen stones, but there's something about diamond stones, because I don't have to worry about flattening them or anything like that anymore. A little bit cleaner. It's just the way that I've gone. I'm not trying to send anybody one way or another endorsing a method, but that's where I am now. I'm using this DMT Magna base system. As the name says, it's a magnetic base. It is a fine and extra fine double-sided deal. And it's a huge stone. It's a big 12-inch long stone. Lots of real estate here. That handles just about most of my rough work, and then I have this extra fine stone, which actually will go on the Magna base, but I put the little rubber feet that they give you and just keep it by itself. This is the stone that gets the most work. This is what I'm going back and honing with most of the time. I'll go straight to this stone. As long as I continue to maintain my edges, I'm not needing to go to those coarser grit stones. If I have a little bit of repair to deal with, or I've gotten lazy and I haven't sharpened as much as I should have, I'll go to those other stones. Even then, it's mostly the extra fine diamond stone. This one does the majority of the stone work. But honestly, the strops, I've got multiple of them floating around the shop. I've got one hanging out over here on the side of my bench. I've got this horse butt strop that sits and floats free. I've got another one over here by my joinery bench where the computer's sitting that I've made. And I've got actually two of them up in the main shop now. So I probably need to build some more. No, I probably don't. Oh, and I've got that flexible one in the drawer there. The strops do like everything for me. I maintain all of my edges using a strop up until the point where it just, I've gone multiple months without ever hitting a stone. And the key is sharpen more to sharpen less. My edges never get so dull that the extremely fine nature of a strop won't fix it for me. Even my turning tools now, I will end up stropping quite a lot. And that's one of the strops that now lives in Maine. Used to hang off my Barnes lathe because I'd be sitting there at the lathe. I reach down, strop the gouge, strop the skew chisel or whatever, and go right back to work. Just keep those edges super sharp, and you really don't have to do much on the sharpening bench. So this entire process here kind of became super minimal. The hand crank and grinder still serves a purpose. Sometimes you got to remove steel. Sometimes you're restoring a tool, you've got to reset a bevel. You drop it and you nick it. That doesn't happen as much in my shop, but now that I said that, it will. There's going to be times when you've got to do that, occasionally restoring tools and things like that. And the hand crank grinder is perfect for that. And it's one of the reasons that I never end up buying a bench grinder is I do so little grinding that's the perfect solution. But here's the funny thing, why does it need to permanently live on top of my sharpening station? It doesn't. Considering how little grinding work I do, there's no reason for it to take up that space. For that matter, the grit and the crap and stuff that comes off of that thing is so nasty. It really has screwed up the surface of this top. So what I think I'll do is create kind of a, like a tray that it will live in, and the whole tray itself will come off the bench, and when I want to use it, I'll set the tray down to try to contain some of the grit that comes out of this wheel. Because, just run your fingers over this and they come away with all kinds of grit, which is what has embedded itself into the surface. So I'm going to make this a non-permanent part of my sharpening station. For that matter, there's absolutely no reason for the, the Gramercy saw vise right here. There's no reason for that to be permanently attached to my sharpening bench, because in my shop, certainly I'm sharpening my own saws, but I don't have to sharpen them that much that I need it there all the time. So I'm going to remove that saw vise and just have it like hang off to the side or go in a compartment or something like that and get it out of the way. There's just no reason to have it laying around there. So what that leaves me with is just really these two, or I guess call them three stones because of the double-sided nature of them, and that little vise that's just sitting there to the right. I'm not certain what I'm going to do with the vise. I do occasionally use it for filing. If I'm doing actual metal filing work, it's nice to hold it here. I'll probably remove these metal plates, or maybe I'll look at a machinist vise. But even then, if I just mount it off to the side, I don't think it's going to be in the way at all. It's relatively low profile, but I think I'll go ahead and take it off for now and just kind of put it in storage and see if I actually miss it. I don't use it for turning burrs on card scrapers anymore. I just hold it in my hand and run the burnisher that way now. So what I came up with is this squirt bottle. I put Windex in mine, and these two stones. So here's the footprint I'm looking at. That's my footprint. And, you know, with a footprint that's this big, it's big enough for me to like bolt the saw vise to the front of it, or come over and drop kind of a hand crank grinder tray assembly down on top of it. So then I began thinking about, well, that would be great. That would take up a lot less room in the shop. That would allow me to get rid of the big cabinet and come up with a different top solution. And you guys have probably seen this before because it's been floating around my shop for a while. This is just a metal shelf that, actually, nobody hate me. Furniture makers out there are going to revolt. I bought it at IKEA. Gosh, 15 bucks, 20 bucks maybe. And the dimensions of this is 12 by like 44 or something like that. This is the new sharpening station footprint. It's actually going to be mounted to the wall. It's going to hang on the wall and doesn't need to roll around anymore. I set it to roll around before because when I first built this, I was living in a hybrid shop with power tools and everything was, you know, heavily mobile and all that fun stuff. There's no reason to have that anymore. So it's going to still live right here. It's just going to hang on this wall. And because I've got 3/4 inch plywood, I can put a French cleat there and hang the whole thing. As far as what the new footprint is going to look like, it's going to be from about here up. I'm going to do away with the entire cabinet underneath. So it's only about 12 to 15 inches tall, hanging on the wall. The top row, imagine if I took these drawers out, and there'll be a little bit, there'll be two drawers on the bottom. They will actually be deeper than they are now. The top section will be open with just vertical dividers, and it's essentially going to be this tall so that I can slide in various stones, because I do still use some of the stones that are in here. I've got some carving gouge slip stones and things. I've got this diamond stone deal that gets used for restoration work. It's coarser. And I also have an extra, what is this, extra coarse diamond stone that gets used when I've got to remove a lot of steel. These things still have a purpose. They're going to slot into those vertical dividers that go underneath the top. At one point I was thinking about adding like a door that slides closed. I don't know that I need to do that. I think I'm just going to leave it open with cubbies. If I later decide to add, you know, sliding something, I could do that. But the idea would be that I can just move these things out of the way and keep this relatively clean. Although these stones will probably continue to live on the surface most of the time because that's the work that I'm doing. But here's the fun part. I can take them, slot them in those little cubbies underneath to free the whole thing up, come back with my Windex, the same stuff I'm using to lubricate my stones, and wipe the whole thing down. Now this is a relatively cheap thing. This is not a, you know, I don't know, this is actually more of like a stainless steel, probably laminate on a fiberboard core. It's not a solid steel shelf. I actually looked for a while and couldn't find anything that didn't come without a base. So I have no illusions that this top might get scratched and scored over time, but considering how cheap it was, the design is going to specifically allow me to, you know, pop out a couple screws, remove it, and necessarily replace it. So I'm really looking forward to having a very slim profile up against the wall. I'm essentially getting back like 18 inches. It'll be closer here. I'm going to have 18 more inches in front to walk around on. The fact that it hangs from the wall means that I can now take the little shelf I want to build for the grinder, I can take the saw vise and actually hang them from hooks underneath. So they'll just swing underneath things. You have to bend over to get to them, but that's certainly not the end of the world. So that is the design change, and I'm pretty excited about it actually, because I think I've become very stingy about my shop space and about lots of elbow room. I love the fact that I'm going to have so much more space right here, and I love the fact that I've got place underneath that I can push things. One thing in particular is this shop stool that I have will actually fit underneath. I can slide it underneath and get it out of the way, because I do from time to time trip on it and stuff like that. So I'm excited about the design. I've still got this wall here that if necessary I can mount things to. I can hang stuff on it if I need something. The Tormak is the one thing I'm uncertain about, and what I may end up doing is just mounting a shelf to the wall underneath it and just setting the Tormak on it, because the Tormak has that little dust shroud thing, that cover that really keeps it nice. So, and all the jigs and things fit in a little box that I have. So that may just go on a shelf out of the way, or I may even just move it out of the shop altogether and just kind of put it in cold storage until I actually need it. One of these days I may just break down and say, you know what, I don't need it anymore. But you know, that's the new design. I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be built entirely out of plywood, because I have some plywood left over. If you guys remember the Woodworkers Fighting Cancer build a couple of years ago, I think, where we made, Mark made a kid's table and chairs. I did the whole thing out of cherry plywood. I have some leftover cherry plywood for that, about just enough to make a carcass. And I'll probably make the vertical dividers out of solid cherry, because I've got some thin stuff floating around. Couple of cross stretchers, so the whole case, the lower case, will be its own box. I may even pocket screw it together. Just want to get this thing done. I'm going to pull out a Festool track saw even to cut the plywood down. Screw together the box, put a central shelf in to divide the space vertically into two, probably put a single runner in, build a couple of boxes. I'll do standard hardwood, maybe dovetail. Yeah, I'll dovetail the drawers, why not? And put two drawers on the bottom. They'll be, and then I literally can come in and just screw the case right into the top, because underneath this top, hold on, you can see how that stainless steel like veneer, it just wraps around, and this is a surface that I can actually screw into. So that's going to just screw into the top of the case, and we'll be done. Creature comforts from there will kind of be figured out. I have the Veritas, what do you call it? Whatchamacallit? Tool rest for a grinder, and I think I'm going to integrate that into my hand crank grinder setup. And again, that's going to be an entirely self-contained deal. In fact, I will probably go and try to find some sort of metallic type tray that I can bolt that to and just figure out something to work there. But, you know, super, super minimal. And that's exactly what I'm talking about. I had this huge thing because I needed all this stuff. With that stone, couple of strops, I can do pretty much any tool in the shop. I do have a draw sharp, that tool that Peter Galbert invented for draw knives, and that lives in a drawer, and that's what's going to go in those drawers. And frankly, those bottom drawers, I'm going to continue to put camera gear in there, so I want them a little bit deeper. So technically, I could get by with just cubbies. Couple of cubbies, especially on that, whatever it was, 41, 44 inch length, I could put quite a few cubbies in there. So the design is still a little amorphous. It's going to evolve as I build it. The first thing I got to do, obviously, is build the case. The Gramercy vise, I think I'm going to end up using, going to end up tapping some holes and just using like threaded rods and like star knobs that I can just slot in and screw the thing down to the front and be done. So that's the whole design, and you can see just how freaking minimal my sharpening is now. A couple of stones, couple of strops, every now and then pulling out a grinder. So, okay, I'm done talking. Jeez, that was a lot. Hey, you know, I knew this question was going to come up. Let me scroll up real quick, make sure I didn't miss anything. Well, what side of the strop do I use? Both. Both sides of the strop, folks. That is why my strop is not, this particular strop is not attached to a board. I have the compound on the rough side and the smooth side is left as is. So I will strop and strop and strop, and then the last thing I'll do is flip it over to the smooth side, strop a couple of times. And the way I look at that is this is almost like, you know, like a finer grit. But most importantly, because there's no compound, because it's super smooth, I'll flip it to the flat side and remove the burr, and you'll actually see the little metal line from the burr come off. And as you know, if you can get a burr, you've reached the edge, and then you pull that burr off and you're perfectly sharp. So technically you don't even have to use compound on a strop. The leather itself will do the job, but I do think the compound kind of makes the job a little bit, it's a little bit more aggressive. But I definitely keep that free for that reason. This particular strop is glued down, the rough side is up, it's a little bit more flexible. So, you know, I put it against a more solid hard maple surface. But yeah, in general, the compound's going on, it could go on either side, but I think the compound's gonna stick to the rougher side a little bit more here. So I don't remember who asked that question. I just saw it and jumped on it. Brian Potter, thank you for that question. Okay, let's see here. Again, just a reminder, if you've got questions, please put them in all caps so that I can see. Any chance I can supply a link to the shelf? I should still know the name. It should still be on the back here. You get to, let's guess what the IKEA thing is called. Ekby Mossby. Ekby Mossby. EKBYMOSSBY 19122. I'll include that in the show notes of this video. It's down on the lower level where the shelves are. And you know what? If anybody finds something that is actual metal, see, you know what? I'm a little hesitant to go that way because I do know what has happened to this top with the grit and the nastiness over the years, and you know, rust removers and all kinds of stuff. I have a feeling that almost needs to be a sacrificial type thing. Or you just get over it. You have it be dirty and you just be cautious of not putting things down. For a while, this rag actually lives in that drawer because when I was doing, like if I was sharpening multiple things, I was setting the rag down on the top and setting the edge tools on it so they weren't going against that grit-filled surface. But I do hope that I can keep it clean. Now that I know that that can happen, I think I'll probably become pretty anal, pretty fastidious about wiping the things down. But I also expect that it's going to scratch that surface a fair amount. And the more that it scratches, probably the more it's going to hang on to grit and nastiness. So, yeah, Peter, I did say pocket holes. But I'll drill them by hand, of course. Hunter wants to know tips for sharpening small chisels. When I sharpen a 1/4 inch and 1/2 inch, I end up having a diagonal line at the edge of the chisel, but I don't get that with 3/4 and up. I'll show you real quick, Hunter, but if you want to look back in the library of this channel, one of the live sessions I did probably 3 months ago, I talked specifically about sharpening narrow chisels and the technique I used for that. I'll revisit it real quick, but I think I went into a little bit more detail on it a couple months ago. So let me just move this real quick, get it a little closer. Everybody gets sick as I move the camera around. Okay, so the difficulty with a narrow chisel and why a lot of people end up getting diagonal. Hunter, are you using a guide or freehand? I would imagine you're using a guide if you're getting a diagonal line because it's probably slipping in your guide. If you are using a guide, I'd be curious to know what kind of guide. But for the most part, the guides have trouble holding them. So the side clamping guides, like the Eclipse style guide or the new Lee-Nielsen guide, will hold this a little bit firmer. The Veritas guide, any of the ones that clamp it on the top, they do tend to slip because there's just very little surface area for this to hold on to. Even with a side clamping guide, because it's very narrow, a lot of times you can put uneven pressure or slightly skew things and change the angle. The first thing you need to recognize is it's not the end of the world if your chisel ends up a slightest bit out of square. Very rarely am I in a situation where I have to have, as I'm chopping down, it has to be perfectly square. Certainly, there are times, but don't stress too much. The first thing I'm going to do is, if I would be normally pulling towards me, I will always skew the small chisel a little bit. Skewing that gives me a little bit more surface area. I've got a little bit less rotation as I skew it. But more importantly, I'll skew it really far, like almost sideways at this point. And I will put 2 or 3 fingers right down here close. If I'm normally sharpening, I'll kind of choke up on it. I'll put the handle on a chisel like tucked into my hand, and I'll do this type of action. And you can very quickly kind of rock that from side to side a little bit. With a narrow chisel like this, I actually won't choke up so much. I'll put my hand way back here on the handle and then put 2 or 3 fingers and really press down so I can feel that bevel, skew it, and then pull it back. And I'm doing much more of a side sharpening. Now with diamond stones, you don't need to put very much pressure at all. In fact, too much pressure and they don't do their job very well. So I'm putting pressure down with these 3 fingers, but really not that much. What they're doing more than anything, because my fingers are coming in at close to 90 degrees, I've kind of got this outrigger thing going on here that allows me to keep it very stable. And that chisel has got a burr on it. So if I were to, look at it this way, if you were to come down and lap the back of this, you wouldn't want to lap it this way because the handle gets in the way. I'll lap it side to side and I'll put 2 fingers down on it and run it back and forth. And those 2 fingers keep me from kind of rolling it, because a narrow chisel like this will want to roll a fair amount. It's the same thing going on the bevel. Use those 2 fingers as an outrigger. If you are using a guide, you can essentially do the same thing. Once you've got it set up in your guide, turn the whole thing, set those fingers down here, and just 2 points of contact at 90-ish degrees to one another, and you've got a really stable surface. These 2 hands kind of work in concert to keep things on both axes in the same plane. So, small chisels, that's how I do it. Same thing on a strop. I purchased the grinder on eBay years ago. I've got multiple videos on my Renaissance Woodworker blog about buying a hand grinder. The times have changed, my friend. Sorry, Christian. It's like the Wild West on eBay right now, especially when it comes to hand crank grinders. I actually started a conversation with a couple manufacturers recently saying who wants to make one, because I think there's a market for it, and not a lot of takers on it. But eBay, antique shops, you can still find them, just prepared to put a lot of work into them because they tend to be really beat up. Even mine is a little bit iffy now. The gears are starting to slip on me a little. I'm not too happy about that. As far as the wheel that's on it, it's just a Norton 3X wheel. I have a 6-inch and an 8-inch. An 8-inch will actually fit on that wheel. I used the 8-inch for years. The 6-inch that I use now, I specifically grind a significant curve in it, and that's for sharpening. If you guys saw my video on doing in-canal gouges, I sharpened it because the bevel's on the inside. So that wheel that's in there now is specifically used for curved stuff like this. I also have some Norton 1/4-inch thick wheels that I use for grinding the inside of hollows and rounds. But again, I so rarely have to do that. So that wheel lives in actually that bottom drawer. So Norton 3X, nothing super fancy there on those wheels. The blue ones. John B. What's a good brand of rasp and files? Wow. Well, you certainly can't go wrong with RU. You can't go wrong with the Auger. Gramercy makes a really good rasp. I've used those a couple of times. I'm not a fan of Karate, the Italian ones. They make pretty good rifflers and small, really fine carving stuff, but I haven't had good experience with their cabinet makers files. Somebody may have some disagreement with that. For the most part, I really like the Auger, even more than RU now, specifically their Sapphire line. These things are indestructible. I don't know that I will ever have to sharpen this. And one that I've been using for probably 6 or 7 years now are these fine Iwasaki impulse hardened Japanese files. These actually create more shavings than dust. They're pretty sweet. I've got one in a round and one in flat. But for the most part, if you're just getting started with them, a good cabinet maker's file, 9 grain, this is an RU. This could do like 90% of the work that you need. And then get yourself a file. The file that I use the most is this Nicholson cabinet maker's file. This is a smooth cut file. You know, I had to make my own handle for it, no big deal. And this one follows up the work from the RU rasp and pretty much smooths anything out. If you get into more detailed stuff, you might want a modeler's rasp. That's what this thing is. This is the highest grain, the finest one that RU makes. I also have one that when I got turned on to the Auger, I picked up one of their sapphire ones and an even narrower profile. This is good for fretwork. That's what I use this for. The only other one, cabinet maker's file, cabinet maker's rasp, a cabinet maker's file, and then you might want a rat tail for really fine stuff, getting into inside tight curves and things like that. Certainly, Nicholson rasps are fine. They are machine cut rasps. You will find that they cut a lot coarser than some of the hand-stitched ones, but they're a hell of a lot cheaper too. So, you know, beggars can't be choosers. When you're first starting out, Nicholson is not a bad place to start. Somebody just wrote about, it was probably Schwarz, but somebody just wrote about another machine-stitched rasp that was pretty good, and I feel like Woodcraft just picked up that line. The only other thing that I use that's like kind of fun is this microplane thing. I got this at Woodcraft. If you've got a lot of heavy removal to do, these are impulse hardened teeth. And again, they're making little shavings. And you can snap in a round profile and a square profile into this like ugly plastic looking thing, but you know, it is what it is. It's a cool tool. It works really well when you've got a heck of a lot of heck of a lot of wood to remove. If anybody can think of what that other brand of machine stitched rasp was, let me know. I'd like to, I can't remember now. Okay, just my name is in caps here, George, so I'm guessing this is a question. I think that's George. Quick enough? It's George, isn't it? Well, you don't have to say that. We'll keep your identity. Do you think it would be as effective sharpening by hand if you'd never known what sharp was using jigs or machines? You know, that's a really good question. I hadn't really thought about that. I want to say no, because I very quickly began to realize what sharp meant was working the edge all the way up to the edge. In other words, getting a burr. When you get that bevel all the way to the flat, assuming that you've got a flat, or you say you've got to lap it because you've got to restore that, when you get that burr, you have reached the zero radius line, the perfect Euclidean intersection of the bevel and the back. And that's what gets that burr. And really, once I got that burr and then I removed it, I knew that I was sharp. I actually found that I had more trouble feeling the burr using jigs than I did going freehand. And what really drove me to freehand was when I started volunteering at the Stepping Stone Museum. First of all, it wasn't period appropriate. Not that we were real sticklers for that there, but it wasn't period appropriate to have any jigs, and we certainly didn't have any jigs, and there were a lot of very, very dull tools. If I wanted to do any demonstrations for the general public, I had to sharpen my tools. It's also where I got a lot of experience on oil stones. So I just started doing it, and frankly, if you were to go freehand, it's actually the way I recommend. Just go cold turkey, because it really wasn't nearly as hard as I'd made it out to be in my mind. And I stopped kind of paying attention to angles and things and just focused on getting a burr. Now, certainly you can develop some bad habits by keep changing the bevel, but the whole convex bevel idea is really old. And you look at a lot of period tools, they have that convex bevel because people just kept steepening and steeping it. And eventually, if it gets too steep, that's why I keep that grinder around. Because then at least I can set the tool rest at 25 degrees and regrind that bevel and you know, start over again. But I don't think it would have hindered me at all. I don't think I lacked an understanding of sharp, had a better understanding of sharp because I use jigs and machines, because sharp is about that burr more than anything. So I hope that's a good answer to your question. It's a nice philosophical question. I appreciate that. Narex rasp any good? You know, I haven't tried them. Maybe that's the ones we're talking about. The only ones that I have experience with are Nicholson RU, Liogé, Gramercy, and some karate ones. Matthew says karate gold. What is that? Do they have different levels? Do I not know this? Are they like bronze, silver, and gold karate rasps? And they've just been a little bit, they feel a lot less aggressive than the Liogé and the RU ones. As far as Narex goes, I have no experience with them, so I don't know. But maybe those are the ones that I'm talking about if Woodcraft is carrying them, because it feels like Woodcraft is the person that was carrying it. Wouldn't you know it wants to know, why do my blades go cloudy when lapping the back on a fine 5,000 grit stone? It goes from shiny on a diamond plate, 1,200 grit, and then cloudy on the 5,000 Sharpen stone. I think anytime you change the sharpening media, you're gonna get some weirdness going on. It's the scratch pattern that's changing. So it's certainly, there's a big difference when it comes to the size of the cutting particles, the grit. That will change the scratch pattern. But Sharpen ceramic stones and diamond stones, it's a different type of particle. Oil stones, a different type of particle. You're gonna get a different scratch pattern, and that's what's going from mirror polish to cloudy. I think if you were to continue to work it on that Sharpen stone, that mirror polish would come back. I don't think you're making it any less flat or any less polished. You're just changing the scratch pattern, so you've changed the reflective index of that surface. I talked about sharpening router planes. No, I have not. I can talk about sharpening router planes. Just making sure I've answered the questions in bold, because I'm now answering questions that are not in bold. Hi, Josh. We believe in doing big things by hand. You know, the deal with freehand first jigs, and it's funny because you get, you know, like luminaries in the craft that are like Christopher Schwarz, that are dead set. Like, I've done it freehand. I like the jig because I can get repeatable results. It's a philosophy thing more than anything else. If you are really concerned about it, must be at 25 degrees, I must be at 38 degrees on that, then yeah, you know, going freehand is tough if you're constantly trying to match that. I know what my bevel angles are-ish, you know, because I know that I ground them kind of in the 25 degree range, but I don't pay attention anymore because it's all about feeling the bevel, working till the burr shows up, and removing the burr. And is that angle changing every time I hone? Probably, but again, because I do so much stopping work, that angle's not changing significantly. Maybe over the course of a year, that angle is changing. And if I find that the edge is starting to crumble, I've gone too shallow. If I find that the edge is giving me a little bit more resistance, maybe it's gone too steep. The only place that really I care so much is on my carving gouges and my hollows and rounds, because I really want very little effort with those tools. But even then, I hit the stone maybe a little bit more often. I don't stretch out the strop quite so far. It's a philosophy that requires you to ignore a lot of precision in order to get into freehand sharpening. Just give up on trying to match bevel angles and focus on the burr more than anything else. But when you do that, it makes things a lot less easy, a lot easier. I can speak. There was a question up here that I wanted to get to. Oh, sharpening router planes, right. Jay Colby asked that. Yeah, sharpening router planes, again, here is the beauty of the freehand method, or, you know, I don't want to do that. I don't even want to say that. It's not so much a freehand method. Here's the beauty of just a simplistic method like this is there's no difference. How do I sharpen a router plane blade? I sharpen it the same way that I sharpen a chisel or a plane blade. It's a matter of feeling the bevel and working from there. Now, the problem is this post that gets in the way. So what I do is set it up on a base. That's why these bases are good. You just drop it on the stone. I feel my bevel. And in this case, I've got such a small bevel and the length of the blade is so small that there's very little kind of leverage trying to pull it off that bevel. So this is a one-handed action. I just work back and forth, just like that. I need a little bit more lube. And that is how that blade is honed. I feel that I've got a burr right there because this blade is sharp. I drop it flat on the stone, press down on it, and just pull back a couple times to remove that burr, and she's sharp. I could do the same exact thing with a strop. In fact, I will a lot of times. This strop pretty much lives on my Rubo bench all the time, but I'll just pull it right to the edge of the bench. In this case, I do want to skew things a little bit because I don't want to cut the leather. See, if you go straight across, the leather, the corner will grab the leather. So you kind of have to pull it back a little bit more. And I just take shorter strokes now because I don't want a chance cutting my leather. Flip it over, do a couple of quick passes just right off the edge here, just at that higher grit. And then pull off the burr. And we is sharp. Very, very sharp. And for that matter, I got an email question earlier today that is on the same vein. Spokeshave blade. Spokeshave is done the exact same way. And honestly, I don't like leaving the strop here because, as I said, all the grit and crap in here. I don't want to get that on my leather. But because the Spokeshave blade is small, because it's short, it freaks people out. And this is, this is indicative of somebody that is used to using a jig. And you can't really hold this in a jig. But when you go freehand, and for that matter, the Spokeshave blade is a great entry point to freehand sharpen it because, again, the blade is really short. So when I come down here and I set it on the bevel, a long blade, there's a longer lever there and it's a lot easier to tilt it off. But on a short blade like this, I can take both hands, kind of rock this up, feel that bevel, and hone it, just like that. When there's no jig involved, it doesn't matter the size of the blade, the curvature of the blade, blah, blah, blah. Feel your burr. Wipe that off the back, and this blade is sharp. So what I would do, just wipe off the schmutz real quick. Now, going to the stones like this is, again, as I mentioned earlier, it's something that I don't do all that often. This blade was sharp already because I was just using it the other day. So I would use this on a strop several times before going back to the stone, but we went straight to the stone. Pull that off. Nice polished blade, ready for work. Slip her back in and we can go back to work. So again, it's a dramatically simpler process when you're not having to futz around with jigs. Certainly there's an element of, it's done super, super fast because you don't have to mess around with a jig, but it's more than that for me. It's more of the fact that I don't care. The shape of a tool, the size of the blade, anything can be done very easily just holding it in my hand. And when you get to a Spokeshave like this Veritas one where the blade is just this tiny little thing, this is even easier to freehand sharpen because it's an even shorter blade. So if you are wanting to learn how to freehand sharpen, a Spokeshave is actually a really good place to start. A router plane blade would be the same way. The bigger router planes, they've got a little bit longer stem on them, but even then, you'll find that it's really easy to balance that tiny little blade on a stone like that. So it's a good method to tackle. what is your experience in Scary Sharp? Scary Sharp, when I used the Work Sharp for years, that was my method. I have used Scary Sharp very recently in working with that jig that I showed on a shop update recently that Sean, you're in the chat room, aren't you? That Sean Graham at Worth the Effort put out. That was all Scary Sharp. Again, it's the same thing. It's the same thing as water stones, oil stones, whatever, except you're dealing with a surface that's not going to go out of flat like a water stone or an oil stone, kind of like a diamond stone. It won't go out of flat. You're changing the grit to work your way up. You're creating a flat bevel. Everything I do creates a flat bevel, but I do start by grinding my tools so that I have a convex bevel caused from the stone. So there's really very little difference. I didn't use the Scary Sharp method long enough to say, oh my God, I'm a total believer in it, but it works. It works just fine. I know many people have used it for years and years and years, and it's a very low barrier to entry on it. People say, yeah, it's wasteful and everything, but sandpaper can be relatively cheap. The problem that I had was using higher grit sandpaper. I never could find it. They say go to auto body stores, and I would go to Pep Boys and they would never have what I was looking for. So I ended up buying a bunch from like a turning supply place and using 600, 800 grit there. I never was able to find like 8,000 grit sandpaper. I didn't look real hard, but yeah, I have absolutely no problem with Scary Sharp. It's just one of those things where I kind of, lack of a better term, graduated beyond it. So. Let me scroll up real quick. You know what? Actually, I'm not. If I missed a question up above, please feel free to restate it. Sean, lots of carvers use a variation to do all those different shapes. What do you mean? A variation of the, oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, good point. So, you know, have a dowel, wrap sandpaper around it. You can get inside the flute of a gouge. You can use the gouge to carve the shape of the gouge, the negative of the gouge, line it with sandpaper and sharpen your gouge that way. Align it with carving compound and sharpen it that way. It's an adaptation of the Scary Sharp method. So yeah, there's actually a really good example. Thank you, Sean. I appreciate that. Where'd that question go? Andrew says, thoughts on tri-squares, combination squares, double squares, tiny dovetail squares, lengths, etc. As far as what combo square, if you guys have seen, I just put out a new product called Hand Tool School Orientation. I used a big box store, this is a Starrett. I used the cheapo, like $5 one at Home Depot, combo square for everything. 12 inch is a really good one to go with. The beauty of it is that adjustability to lock it in place, set your links and stuff like that. And this can also be used as a good square for squaring off the ends of boards. A good 12 inch length will handle a lot of that. As you graduate and want another one, I love a 4-inch combo square. It's perfect for laying out joinery. The big 12-inch one gets cumbersome or whatever. But again, the same ability to lock this in place, set your measurements, set whatever, and go off of that. As far as regular non-adjustable tri-squares, I'm a proponent of making your own in that case. And that depends on what you want to use it for. If you want to use it for laying out joinery, 4 6-inch square is good. If you want to use it for laying out board sizes, 12, 14 inches is really good. Or you can go with, you know, the big, what is this, 24-inch type deal. Double squares, dovetail squares, never really had a use for them. Never really, I recognize that they exist, just never had a moment when I was like, man, I wish I had it. I was doing a demo the other night for the hand tool school, and I thought, oh, it would be good to have a dovetail square now just to show how I'd undercut something, but I don't think I would ever use it in actually cutting dovetails. I guess I'm just not a very precise woodworker. Maybe that's my problem. So, yeah. Let's see, we got a couple minutes here. I'll take a couple more questions, but I do want to take a moment for the simple strategies are public service announcement. No, I do appreciate you guys coming out, but I do want to highlight, I just released Hand Tool School Orientation. I was calling it Semester Point 5 for a while as I was building it, and one of my Hand Tool School apprentices pointed out that from a marketing perspective, that's terrible. Semester 0.5 doesn't really roll off the tongue. Orientation sounds a lot better, and it's very clear about what it is. This image shows the bench hooks, the bench, the marking gauge, and the Japanese toolbox. Those are the 4 projects in that semester. There's 3 lessons that come with it. 4 lessons really: hand plane 101, saw 101, chisel 101, and wood 101. They're all kind of meant to be that encyclopedia resource while you build those 4 projects. It is available right now. It's over at handtoolschool.net. Lots of people jumping into it, lots of people really enjoying it. Really, really excited to finally get it out because it took a lot of planning. It took multiple trips up to Maine. The whole thing is filmed in the Maine shop because I wanted to get away from all the tools and all the excess stuff. That's not true. I filmed the lessons here in this shop just because I wanted to show a lot of different tools and I wasn't going to lug all these tools up to Maine. So if anybody's interested, certainly check it out. I'll include a link in the show notes, but that's my little public service announcement. So how about some more questions? How do I sharpen bits? What kind of bits, Sean? As far as how I sharpen, it's all done with files. An auger bit file for my augers. I will use an auger bit file for my center bits. I've got a video on center bits in my library that goes into great detail on how to sharpen center bits. Auger bits done the same way. Brad point bits, I will use the same auger bit file. The really, really small brad point bits, I'll be honest, my brad point bits are not high quality, so if they get dull, I usually buy another one. You can actually drill a hole, shove a bunch of sharpening compound in that hole, and then run the bit through it a couple times, and that actually does a really good job. It's kind of like stropping a brad point bit. For the larger brad point bits, I'll use a file again. Sharpen the spurs, sharpen the lips, and I'm done. Twist bits, you can do the same thing because you've got that flat edge that you can just run a file across. I haven't had any need to sharpen my twist bits because I've got this set of DeWalt twist bits that I've had for years that are like super, super hard, and frankly, I just don't use them enough to dull them significantly. The ones that I'm constantly sharpening, my auger bits and my center bits, my spoon bits, but I actually find spoon bits are super easy because the spoon bit is just, work the file across the face. You're essentially working the back of the chisel the whole time and never touching the bevel because the bevel on a spoon bit is entirely convex. These guys all done with auger bit files. I have from time to time stropped the lead screw. Again, drill a hole, rub that little crayon in the hole, kind of squeeze a bunch of that green compound into the hole, and then run the bit up and down, up and down, up and down. And what it does is clean out and sharpen those threads. But auger bits, it's a different world. They don't have to be quite as polished and durable as an edge as a chisel or a plane blade. File does just fine in that case. Small brad points, yeah. I'm contributing to the waste of society by just getting new ones. Yeah, I think you could probably do all kinds of, like the same way you would sharpen files and rasps with vinegar type solutions to actually etch the steel. But I haven't had such an overwhelming reason to need to do that yet. I didn't run a school like you did, where you probably had a lot of dull bits. Hey, thank you, Angel Lost 777. Orientation has been great. I like that. Post pictures of your bench. We want to see it. Any other questions? Let's take one more question before I go. How's that sound? That sounds like good stuff to me. I've got a 10-quarter piece of 15.5-inch wide walnut to saw up here, so I got to get to that at some point. I'm glad to hear that's your method too, Sean. I'm not the only wasteful one around here. I just haven't had a need to sharpen them that much. And frankly, they're so cheap. The small ones are so super cheap. I picked up an index of high-speed steel bits, like a 16th to a 1/4 inch and 64th inch gradations. And I think it was like $15. And that will last me forever. So Yes, Dwayne, I do have, hey, thank you, Andrew. That's very nice of you. Do I have experience with new Irwin augers? I do. And where is it? I liked it so little that I can't find it anymore. Yeah, they're not the same. They're really not. The auger bit, the traditional auger bit, has a very specific job. The lead screw certainly is pitched appropriately for the wood you're working on. It's pulling the wood in. So these lips right here are doing all the cutting. The spurs are scoring the perimeter of the hole. The Irwin bits, I found the geometry was all wrong on the cutting lips. It was too steep. The spurs were like wimpy. They weren't scribing the hole very well. So it just ended up tearing out. It ended up stripping the lead screw because the bevel was too steep. So it was essentially creating too much force up, and it caused the lead screw to kept stripping out of its hole. So without the lead screw to pull the auger in, I was doing a lot of freewheeling, ended up burnishing the surface more than anything else. I tried several of them. In my experience, you can find auger bits by the scores on eBay, garage sales. Go to grandpa'slittlefarm.com and Ernie will hook you up with auger bits. They are everywhere. There's no reason to buy a poor geometry modern bit when you just a little bit of rust removal and an auger bit file. Pick up your auger bit file from Tools for Working Wood. You can sharpen them up super, super quick. Now, I went to Liberty Tool this summer to buy a few auger bits because I forgot some. And yeah, there was a lot of junky ones there, and I had to dig through a bit to find ones that didn't have the spurs broken off and weren't bent or whatever. But I guarantee you, if you check out Ernie at Grandpa's Little Farm, he'll hook you up. He's got lots and lots and lots and lots of them. So, okay, one last question. How do I set Rake and Fleam? I don't pay much attention to it, honestly. No, that's not true. When you're first starting out with hand sawing, it's not something that I would recommend obsessing about. Rake and Fleam can be finely tuned to create a saw that does a very specific task very, very well. I want to cut green wood that is 16 and 32 quarter thick. You can tune the Rake and Fleam on that saw to have a nice positive rake so that it cuts real well through green wood. And you can set it in such a way that it does a great job for that. I have a saw that I specifically use for 12 quarter and thicker wood. A lot of that was pitch, but it was also very, very aggressive rake to cut very quickly through that. When you're starting out, you've got a couple of saws, there's no reason to get super, super fancy here. Get a rip saw, don't put any rake on it at all. If you want, put a couple degrees of rake on it. No Fleam at all. Crosscut saw, like do a standard 20 degrees, maybe 25 degrees of rake and Fleam on that. And the super, super low budget version of this is you take a block, you lay out, say you're gonna do 25 degrees. You take a block, you lay out a 25 degree line across the top and a 25 degree line going the other way. So you get an X. Cut a small saw kerf on those lines, like 1/8 of an inch deep. Then when you're sharpening, you take that block, you've got it in your vise, you take that block and you slot the kerf over the edge. What that does is it gives you an actual block that gives you your line. And as you run your file across, you just line your file up with that block, and the block will slide up and down the teeth, and you've got a gauge to work with the whole way. You can also take a block and you can drill, again, a 25 degree angle into the face, and you can slot that block onto the end of your file. So now when you turn the file, the block is at the parallel to your plate when you hit that 25 degree angle. I did that for a while. I've recently learned from Niles Crack at Kennebec Saws. What am I doing? Looking in this guy. KennebeckSaws.com to use that little block method. That's a lot more effective. If you want to get super fancy, you can use the Veritas version of this tool, or you can get this from Blackburn Toolworks. This has a fence that will set the Fleam. It's got a rotating barrel that will set the rake. And it's a matter of just plugging it in and lining up your saw file while you work. The super low budget method works just fine. If I wasn't good friends with Isaac, I probably wouldn't have that tool. So, good files for saw sharpening, whatever you can find lately, man. They've become this run on saw files. Go to kennebecsaws.com. Niles is now selling really good Baco saw files. Baco, I think, tends to be the best ones. I've been using the Veritas kit for a while, but apparently Veritas can never keep those in stock. So kennebecsaws.com is your choice there. By the way, Niles and I have a saw sharpening video we did together in Maine. I still have to edit that, but that'll be coming along sometime soon. So anyway, well, guys, yes, Sean, it does have a level on it. And honestly, I don't pay much attention to that level. It's a good idea to pay attention to the level, I suppose, but I find that feeling level is more feeling it than looking at a bubble on anything. So if you have other questions about sharpening, feel free to leave a comment here. Send me an email at my site. I'm happy to continue talking about it. It's a massive, massive subject, but for now, I'll just say thanks for coming out. Always fun to hang out with people. Always great to have so many people in the chat room. So everyone have a super wonderful, fabulous, fantastic night.